In this recording, we're going to start our discussion on how to customize forms by dealing with one of the most basic concepts, and that's selecting multiple objects and aligning those objects, even sizing those objects. Once again, I'm going to be using my pizza orders database. Excuse me. If you don't have any of the work that we've done prior to this, shouldn't be a problem. And I'm going to start with a brand new form. So what I'll first start with is kind of follow the technique that the book uses and create a blank form, and then add my orders information to that form using the field list. And this is the way the book does it, and it has some value, but I'm not actually going to stick with this. To add these fields, you simply double click them. Remember, the order ID is an auto number field. It means absolutely nothing to anybody. I'm not even going to include it on my form so the user doesn't have to worry about it. So I'm going to start with the order date. This is in the layout view. These layouts are being put in, and this is creating a table layout. Notice how all these have dotted boxes around them. That means they're all in the same layout. I'm not a big fan of layouts. That's another downside of this, because layouts they're nice because if I resize one of these, it resizes all of them, but yeah, that's pretty trivial advantage for using this technique. So that's the way the book suggests you do it, and if you've got a lot of fields like that one, it could take a little bit of time. I'm not a big fan of that. When you do your homework assignments, they ask you to do it that way. And no, I'm not going to say that. They ask you to do it that way, but you don't have to. There is no way for anybody to tell, including me, whether you started with a blank form and put a bunch of stuff on there, or whether you used a wizard to do it instead. So I'm going to use the form wizard, and using table orders. I don't want the order ID, but I want everything else. So I'm going to add everything and then send the order ID back. Next, next, oops, next, next. And give it a name, FRM orders, finish. I get the same kind of result, actually a little bit better, because notice these field captions all fit. In the other version, if you look back in the recording, green peppers and cheese sticks was chopped off. And these are all not exactly the same size. They're sized a little more appropriately. And so I'd like this a whole lot better. And if you're doing a split form that had, not a split form, but a two-part form, a form with a subform, that's also easier using the wizard. If you look at those homework assignments, look at what they want you to create. There's no way for me to tell whether you did it with a wizard, if you did it manually. My advice is use the wizard. First thing you should always do is rename the title. So let's go to layout view for that. During this recording, we'll be switching between layout and design view quite often. There are certain things that you can do in layout view that are easier in layout view. There are certain things you can only do in layout view, and there are other things that can only be done in design view. So we'll be switching back and forth quite a bit. Okay, so I'm going to switch to design view first. So I'm using these little buttons down here. You can also go to the design tab and use these buttons to switch back and forth, but often I'm on a different tab, and so then I have to switch tabs and then switch views. These are a little easier. They do the same thing. Form view, layout view, and design view. And first thing I want to do is there's a little bit of excess space here, so I want to get rid of that space by resizing those labels. So here's all those labels. In the book and in my notes, it mentions if I want to resize all of these, I can select them all by shift clicking. I'm holding the shift key down while I'm doing that. That's one way. But in design view, and in a design view only, you can select a bunch of objects by simply dragging a box through them. You don't even have to drag a box around them, just into them is enough, and now they're all selected. Could resize these by grabbing the sizing handle, there it is, for any one of these, and drag them. That works. But in my notes I also mentioned, they don't mention this in the book, if you hold the shift key down and then use the arrow keys, this is the right arrow key, makes things bigger. Makes things smaller, left arrow key. If you use up and down, it adjusts the height and the width. So that can really help you with sizing these things to a smaller amount when sometimes your mouse is just a little too cumbersome. And now, of course, the next thing I'd like to do is take all of these objects and move them closer to their labels. Now the labels are a little more appropriately sized. Unfortunately, if I move these using the mouse, looks okay, As soon as I let go, watch what happens to the labels. They also move. In design view, the labels and the text boxes and the check boxes are connected to each other, and you can't move them. So I'm going to undo that. You can't move them as a group. The labels, obviously I could resize them, and I think I could move them. So I could move them closer and then move all this over, but this is probably one of the circumstances where layout view comes in a little handier. Layout view allows you to see the data, and it allows you to see the outline of the form, and it allows you to modify things. Unfortunately, you can't in layout view drag to select objects. I just tried it, it didn't work. So here I have to use the shift technique, which gets pretty tricky when you get to the checkboxes here. And see, I just missed, and so now I got to start over again. Notice the whole form is selected. I could do a Control A, but then it will select the labels, so that's not what I want. So I just have to be careful. And missed again. Try going too fast sometimes. Okay, now I've got all of those. And remember, even the book talks about this, you can move objects that are selected using the arrow keys as well. Now there's no shift key here. If I add the shift key, it resizes them. If I simply use the arrow keys, it moves them. And that's probably better in this case than using the mouse, because with the mouse I'm very likely to shift them up and down as well, which will screw up the alignment, which I don't want. Right. So we can select multiple items in design view by just dragging through them. You can select multiple items in layout view. You must use the shift click technique, and then you can use arrow keys to move them finite amounts. You can also use shift arrow keys to resize them. Okay, my customer field here is a little big, my size field is a little big. These are all varying sizes, and Access is kind of trying to figure out how big to make them. These obviously are the wrong size. This is not as big, doesn't need to be this big. There are no orders with that much, that need that much space. All right, so what I'm going to do, one of my techniques that I like is to make the fields kind of consistently sized. I think it looks a little better. It's not bad with these ragged sizes, but I think it looks better if they're consistently sized. With a little bit of experimenting before I started this recording, I've realized that if I take the order date and the customer date and the customer name and the size, I can make them all the same size, and none of them will be really drastically too large or too large. The key is the customer, so I'm going to make sure that fits for the largest customer name. First of all, how do I make them all the same size? As far as I can tell, there is no way to do this in design or in layout view. I'm in layout view, selected a couple of objects. I can right click, but the align options are not here. Okay. You cannot change alignment or sizes using layout view. So once again, I'm going to shift to design view, and I'm going to select all three of these. And then in the Arrange tab, you have the size and alignment options available that are not available to you in layout view. In this case, I want to make them all the same size. So I'm going to drag this down, and I'm going to size them to the narrowest. Now I already know that my customers are not going to fit in there, and I want to make sure I make these just the right size. So now I'm going to switch back to layout view where I can see the actual data, and notice already the first one is chopped off. Select all three. I'm sorry, before I do that, I went into the database and looked for the longest name, and the longest name is, where is it, Fehrenbach. Okay. So I'm going to search. One of the cool things you can do with these forms is to search. I'm going to click on the customer because that's the field that I want to search. I'm going to press Control F. You can also go to the Home tab and do a search from there. But Control F is one of the keys I use in all kinds of programs. Just about all Windows programs and even the Mac programs use Control F to find something. And so what I want to find is Fehrenbach, but I don't want to type the whole thing, and I don't know what the spacing is, so I'm just going to say if it's any part of the field, show it to me. Okay, so I'm going to find the next record. Let's pull this over, and sure enough, there it found it. So I can get rid of this. Now select all three of these and make them a little bigger. Shift arrow keys until Timothy fits. And now all of my sizes and all of my dates should fit with no problem. Okay, so that's a technique I'm going to use again. I want my soda, cheese sticks, coupons, and order totals to all fit the same size. I'm going to make them this size here and see how that works. My soda is the one that I really have to watch out for, because there are certain kinds of soda. I think it's the Mountain Dew clone here, whatever that is, Dew Caffeine, there it is, the Dew Caffeine, that I want to make sure fits. So once again, I'm going to Design View. I'm going to select all 4 of these fields, and I'm going to size them to the narrowest. Again, I could have sized them to the widest and then shrink them. I'm going to size them to the narrowest, and now I'm going to switch back to Layout View and see how that looks. The Dew Caffeine just fits. There's a little bit extra room, but I don't think it's bad. And then here's the cheese sticks, the coupons. They're all the same size. Now this is me. You may not like them. You might prefer to have your cheese sticks shrunk down so that it only shows 2-digit numbers, have your coupons and your total shrunk down. Completely up to you on how you want to resize those, or follow the instructions in the book. But this is a technique that I use. It makes the forms, I think, very visually pleasing, my term. The book also likes to have everything left aligned. If I wanted to, I could select all of these 3 fields and say, you know what, I want the alignment, and I'm using the Format tab here, to be to the left, and then it aligns everything to the left. Numbers often look better aligned to the right. It's kind of a personal call, or a call based on what's in the book. Okay, I've got a lot of wasted space here with my check marks. And I also don't always like check marks to precede or to succeed my labels. I like it the other way around. Okay. So I have a nice pepperoni here, but I want the checkbox to be on the other side. So I'm going to move it. In a Layout View, this is pretty simple. Okay. And then to save even more space, I'm going to put this checkbox up here, and use the arrow keys to get it pretty close. Put this up here. Notice you don't get any preview. Not going to worry too much about alignment, because that's the next thing I'm going to do. But I do want to get the spacing halfway decent. I think one of the things I could really add to make this friendlier in future editions is the ability for you to see what you're dragging. So when I drag onions, I can actually see it and see where it lands. And one more. By the way, before I forget, I did change all the captions for these fields. In previous recordings, I didn't have captions on them. Most of my programs, or most of my Access databases, are accessed using computer programs from Visual Studio, and so the captions don't really mean anything. But here, when you're creating forms and for these recordings, they are important, so I added captions to all these. These are the captions for the pepperoni sausage mushrooms field. Remember, green peppers, the field name is lowercase g, uppercase p, no spaces, so the captions help these things. All right, those are kind of ragged looking, so now I'm going to work on alignment. I can't align in Layout View, so I'm going to switch to Design View. I'm going to select all of my checkboxes. Try not to get the other things, the labels. Notice the labels all overlap. That shouldn't be a problem. And now I'm going to go back to my Arrange. I'm going to use the Align button to align the bottoms of all of those. Okay. So now those, I know my checkboxes are nice and aligned. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the labels. I'm going to make them align to the bottom. And they look like they're pretty well lined up with their checkboxes as well. So I'm going to go to Layout View. And yes, they look pretty good. I could maybe move pepperoni over a little bit, but it's fine. But if I wanted to, from here, I can select all the labels and use the arrow keys to fine-tune the alignment. But that looks pretty good. All right, the last thing I want to do is move these up, get rid of this white space. So once again, I'm going to select all of these so I can see it. Could do this in Design View as well, and just slide them right up. And now they look pretty good. Right. So there's my new form, created using a wizard and then customized. I think that saves a little bit of time, particularly if you have subforms, and we'll see that again in a future recording. So I hope that helps you select objects quickly. Also, with a little bit of practice, you start understanding what you can do in Layout View versus Design View and where it's more convenient to do things. And so I hope that helps you with those things.